Welcome. My name is Josh. I'm one of the pastors here at LBC. For everyone in the room, a big welcome to all of you, and for everyone who's joining us online as well. Hello. So great you can be here today. Here we are, January 16. My daughter we've got a bit of a countdown happening because she's really excited for when school goes back. So she's keeping on top of it. 15 days, tomorrow 14 days. So I get like a daily update on where we are in our school holiday journey. Well, if you haven't been with us so far, we've started a new series for this year, 2020U, called New Year, Same You. Because it seems that every year when you come to that open page of what could be, when you sit down and look ahead, we tend to, if not purposely make decisions. We tend to sort of go, what could change this year? What could be different? We reflect on what was. We look forward to what could be. And one of the issues we come to again and again is that we make these plans, but we're still the same people. So that generally things don't always change. So we've been looking, and we'll continue to look at Proverbs around some wisdom so that as we make new decisions and as we go forward to make wise decisions, we have a bit of a biblical framework for how we do that. So the question behind the series is, what do you do when you follow you everywhere? You're always there, every good decision, every bad decision. So how do we learn, how do we grow, and how do we, with our faith in Jesus, step forward to lead lives that honor God and are for the good of other people? So that's what we want to look at for this series. So last week we looked at the idea that wisdom is a good thing to have. So we should go and get wisdom. How do we get wisdom? Great question. One thing we looked at, which you can do, is to ask the question, what is the wise thing to do? If wisdom is out there and it's something we can attain, then why don't we stop and ask ourselves before we make a decision, preferably. It doesn't always happen that way, does it? Generally, we know what the wise thing to do is when we are dealing with the result of our good or bad decision. So sometimes it's nice to stop before you make a decision and go, God, what is the wise thing for me to do here with who I am and where I want to go? So hopefully you've had a chance to ask that question, and if not, at least have it in your arsenal of questions to ask when it comes to making wise decisions. Today we're going to look at paths, around the idea that where our eyes are looking and where our feet take us, the path we walk on is very important. And next week, I think, is going to be the favorite for me anyway. It's called Thou Shalt Not, and we're going to be looking at what God does not like and how it centers around people and relationships. So for today, let's get into it. We're going to be looking at paths. Growing up, many of my memories of holidaying down in Esperance had to do with exploring. Now, has people been to Esperance? Yeah. I grew up in Kalgoorlie, 3 hours away, 3.5. It was great, 3 but 3.5 if you're legally. And it was really, depends who was driving. But it was great. It was right there. Esperance is a beautiful, beautiful place. I think if I'd grown up in Perth, I may not have gone there because it's a lot longer to get there from here. But Esperance is just beautiful. The beaches, the rocks, the cold. It's just got some beautifulness to the cold there. And there's just this feeling of isolation. There's just the backdrop of the beach and this feeling that it's just you. There's no developments. There's no, gelato ice cream shop at the top waiting for you. It's just beaches and isolation. It's absolutely beautiful. And my memories of Esperance a lot of the time involved the family setting up camp, the muster point, and then we had time to just go and explore. And it was great because when I left the safety of the muster point, I had no idea where I was going to end up. I knew I'd stay on the beach, but I would get to go and explore rocks, sand dunes. I'd get to go and see all sorts of things that I had not planned. I just set out going, I'm going to see where the path leads me. And a lot of the time it led me to rocks because I liked climbing around rocks. And I loved just that feeling of jumping from rock to rock and looking and seeing where the crabs were, running away at first because I was scared, then realizing, they're more scared of me than I am of them. Then it became a bit of crab chasing and I'd go and try and find them and scare them. Anyway, just things you do as a child to entertain yourself. And it was so exhilarating to just be able to go and not know where you're going to end up and explore and experience the journey and test yourself and see what would happen. It was really great. And I encountered all sorts of dangers as I went on these trips. Now, in reflection, I realized that there may have been some exaggeration, partly because I was younger and partly because I wanted to seem really cool to my parents and be like, I did this and I went here, and I wanted to seem, yeah, I can handle anything. Little 8-year-old boy. Yeah. Anyway. What about you guys? Who's with me on the, you just want to explore? Who are the explorers? Just to set out and let's just go see what we see. Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? Who's the stay the path? There's fun within what is known. Yeah. Yes, yep, that's it. If you stick with what you know what you'll get. Why? And you know how to have fun within those parameters. It's great, isn't it? There is definitely some wisdom in staying with what we know, but there's also wisdom in exploring what is new, what is possible. But what is non-negotiable, whether you want to explore or whether you want to stay the path, is that we need to pay attention to the path that we are traveling on. We need to be aware of where our feet are taking us. Let's have a look at paths for a second. If you got out your phone right now and you opened up Google Maps, or if you're using Apple Maps, hopefully you get to where you're going. I remember when Apple Maps first came out, and there's that classic joke, someone using Apple Maps walks into a bar, or was it a church, or was it a park? Anyway, because their mapping started off a little, I'm sure it's fine now. I just use Google Maps, I have no idea. Anyway, if you open up Apple Maps right now, or Google Maps, or whatever it is you're using, and you go, I'm starting here, and I want to go here, it will calculate for you the most direct path. It says if you stay on this path, you'll get from here to here, and I bet you it will take this long. Most of the time, it's right. Occasionally, very wrong, and that costs us, doesn't it? Because if you're not someone who's in the habit of leaving 5 minutes early and you really need that number to be correct, it can bite us sometimes. Hey, anyway, that's another message. Here to there, direct path. Stay on it, you will get there. And if you try and be naughty and deviate from the path, what does it do? Tells you, corrects you. You can go that way, but it's going to add 5 minutes. That's a direct path. Simple, straightforward. We understand that. Say you were to walk in and join a sports team. You've decided to get back into whatever your childhood sport, let's say it was badminton. You just love badminton. And you think to yourself, I am going to go and join a badminton club. You join the club and it's pretty straightforward. They have opening times, they have rules, you rock up, you bring your equipment, you get to play. It's a very clear, straightforward path. There's a bit of wriggle room as to how you interact within the club, but as you walk through this environment, you know sort of what to do. Now say you swap jobs. You get into a new workplace. You get into your new workplace and you think, I want to be promoted. I think I have good skills. I think I have good work ethic, and I want to be rewarded for what I bring to this company. You go and you look at the promotion schedule within your workplace, if they have one, and you go, if I meet these standards and I do this good of a job, I can sort of see I'll get promoted here, promoted here, promoted here. And if I'm here in 10 years, I'll end up, should be here. Right? It's a straightforward path, but it's a little bit more complex because you've got to perform. The company has to honor that promotion path, and you have to be better than other people at times. So there's a clear path. You sort of know where you're going to end up. It's a little bit more complex. Now, say you enter a new relationship or a new friendship. Now, that one's a really complex one, isn't it? You and I know how to treat other people. We know to look them in the eye, to smile at them. We know to talk well, to put our best foot forward when we're meeting someone new. When you're dating, this is very crucial because you're trying to suss each other out. As you're entering a new friendship circle, perhaps, you're trying to figure out, do I belong here? The path we walk here is extremely diverse. How you act and how others act it's complicated. There are many different paths to follow. There's no manual out there that says how to get friends. Step 1, say this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, invite them here. Step 4, you're best friends for life. Go and get each other's name tattooed on your forehead. Woohoo! There's no thing like that. Friendships are complicated. They're hard. What you and I choose to do, relationships, what we choose to do in those contexts, it matters. but it's complicated. There's many different ways we can do it. The more complex the environment that you and I are in, the harder it is to see a clear path forward, because there are generally many good ways to proceed. In fact, for a lot of people who follow Jesus, we're not normally stuck with the question of what is the right thing to do, because we sort of know what's right and what's wrong. It's either very clear in the law, or it's very clear within our tradition around what's sort of right, what's sort of wrong. When Jesus summarized how we live, he says, love God, love people. So we're not normally stuck going, should I speed or shouldn't I speed? Right and wrong. As Jesus followers and as people, what we're normally stuck with is, what is the most good I can do? What is the wisest choice for me here? There are near infinite ways that we can honor God and honor people. But what is the best use of our time? What is the best use of our history? What's the best use of who we are, how God made us to function, and what is the need within particular environments? So we see wisdom as doing what is wise in a complex and seemingly disordered world. So when we're reading the Book of Proverbs, which is where we've been sitting out today, we're going to have a little dive into what the Book of Proverbs, and we're going to even get to watch a video together from the Bible Project, who I love. So that'll come up in just a moment. When we read through the Book of Proverbs, a helpful way of understanding all the content we have from the 31 chapters is that they help us walk a path that follows the example of Jesus more closely. If Jesus has had an impact in your life and you say, I'm a follower of Jesus, then the Proverbs are a way that we can read and gain wisdom to better follow Jesus. If you're someone who doesn't follow Jesus, but you're in business, I encourage you to read the Book of Proverbs. There's a lot of wisdom there that good business principles are built on. Good wisdom is good wisdom. As we'll see, the Proverbs were collected from a wide range of sources, but we'll get to that in just a moment. A great line from a commentary I found was this: if Proverbs was an extended commentary on the law of love, then it helps pave the way for the one who became true love incarnate, Jesus. In other words, if Proverbs expands on how the people of God should live radically different lives in light of the love he has shown them, it sets us up for Jesus, because when he came to earth, he displayed true wisdom through making love as the standard for how we live under God's total authority. Isn't that amazing? If Proverbs extends the law of love, the covenant that God made with his people, and says this is how you should live radically different, then it sets us up as people who believe in Jesus and a community that's centered on Jesus to look at how Jesus lived and marry the Proverbs up and say it helps us point towards Jesus and his way of love. So what is the Book of Proverbs? What does it have to do with the paths we walk? Let's have a look at the book for a second. So Proverbs was compiled for the purpose of giving wisdom to the people of Israel. They wrote them things down so that they could see how wisdom is applicable for day-to-day living. This is not just a thought experiment to go, how can I gain the most wisdom to know a theoretical answer? It's saying, how can the people of God live day to day so that they may grow in wisdom and follow God more closely? So at the time of writing, what you see in Proverbs is actually something that stood out from the people at the time. Within the book of Proverbs, there are protections for the vulnerable, there are safety and guarantees for the marginalized, and it asks us to treat other people with love and compassion. By modern standards, we look at that and say that's just normal, right? It's not. Shouldn't everyone be treated with love and compassion? Shouldn't we look out for those who are least and who don't have what they need? Shouldn't we be looking out for them and being able, looking to seek to raise them up? Well, at the time, not all nations joined in this sort of thinking. There was more scarcity around different resources, and people were more out for themselves, and there wasn't a standardized, this is a good way to live. So each nation did as each nation chose. So when the people of Israel stood and said, we live under God's authority and we're going to treat people with love, we're going to treat people fairly, we're going to provide protections for the vulnerable and the marginalized, that was actually quite different to how other nations functioned. So it's a good insight into God's heart for people. Now, the book, in terms of it coming together, is like many books we find in the Old Testament, a little bit complex. So you don't have to remember all this, but this is just best guesses from academics. You ready? They reckon around 729 to 699 BCE is when a majority of the Book of Proverbs was put together. So there's a collection of writings from King Solomon. You'll see that from Proverbs 10 onwards. And they reckon that it was compiled around that time, but he wrote it about 200 years earlier. So Solomon, who wrote a majority of the Proverbs you and I are probably more familiar with, he wrote all of them, penned them down, 200 years passed, and somebody had the wise idea we should probably put them together so we can all make sure we don't lose these things. So they put them all together and made it happen. Around 400 BCE, so a few hundred years after that, chapters 1 to 9 got put together with the sayings from Solomon. And then they found later parts of Proverbs towards the back end of the book, like Proverbs 31. They find that that's linked to writings that could be from 1000 BCE, so before Solomon wrote his, or 600 BCE, so around the time the book was compiled. So that is to say, Proverbs floated around the wisdom, not just with the people of God, but in other nations as well, because they find very strong links to Egyptian wisdom writings as well. Some as early as 2500 BCE reflect what we have in Proverbs. But at some point in time, someone went, we should write this down and capture this as our nation's way of understanding wisdom within the context of God. But wisdom is not something, as we'll see in the video, that's exclusively just for the people of that time. It's God's wisdom is sort of woven and threaded into creation. So it's not surprising, or shouldn't surprise us, that other nations had access to similar wisdom if God indeed is the author and originator of it. So it's a very complex way of coming together. But for you and for me right now, we can open Google, we can open our Bible, and it's neatly presented. Amen? It's just there. So helpful. A long process to the point where I can open a book and go, speak to me, God, through this. It's just incredible. It blows my mind, the complexity that had to come together for our modern day Bible. It's just amazing. Now, the major themes we find within the book are to do with wise and foolish living. If you want to be wise, live like this. If you want to be foolish, live like this. There's a lot to do with feet and walking. The Hebrew language is a very of the earth. So there's a lot of talking around like, deep inside your guts. There's a lot of talking around your feet, the tongue, the mouth, because of what people say. They wouldn't say people thought this. They'd say that person said this, and that shows what their inside world is doing. So it's a very very of the earth language. So lots of talk about mouths, tongues, hearts. There's talk around protection, how to protect people. God's justice over the wicked is a big one. And I love this one because it's, again, I don't like it. It's back to the discipline thing. Prudent living and moderation. A lot of life comes back to prudent living and moderation, to which all the thrill seekers and the rule breakers are like, boring. Anyway. So those are some of the themes we find within the book of Proverbs. Derek Wilson approached me last week and said a practice he'd done in the past, if there's 31 Proverbs and 31 days in the month, or, if there's less, just don't read the last couple, I guess. He said, you can read a proverb a day. I think you'll become very wise if you follow that practice, just taking a proverb a day and reading it through. I'm sure some of you have done that exercise as well, which is why you guys are so wise. It's why you guys are so awesome and amazing, because you've immersed in it. I love it. I think we'll end up very wise indeed. Some of the classics we find in the book of Proverbs, and sometimes if you were wanting to prove a point to someone, you might bring some of these out of your arsenal. You might say, "He who walks with the wise shall be wise," which is a way of a parent saying to their child, "Why are you friends with them?" Words kill, words give life. They're either poison or fruit. You choose. It's a good one. It's very wise. The sleep of a laboring person is sweet. We've all experienced that. You've worked hard all day. You've been on the tools, and you come home and you just rest. How good is that sleep after knowing you've done a good, hard day's work? It's very peaceful, isn't it? One man pretends to be rich yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor but has great wealth. That is, hands down, for price of admission, for purchasing a Bible, which costs you, depends how fancy you want to go, Bibles can cost you between $10 and up to about $80, $90. But for about a $30 Bible, if you go to Proverbs and you purchase that Bible, you open it up and you circle that verse, that's price of admission right there. That is some of the best financial advice you will ever receive from this. One man pretends to be rich yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor and has great wealth. Live within your means. Don't try and be showy. Don't try and have the latest, greatest, best just because it proves something in your ego. Earn your finances, live well, and don't be extravagant. Like, how amazing is that? How much richer would you or I be if we look back at some of our past purchases and went, did I need to? Yes, it was a nice new car. Could I have done with an older one? Yes, it was a really fun experience. Could I have had a different experience? Anyway, some great financial advice there. And then finally, this one. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Very similar, Jesus says, out of the mouth, the heart speaks. Proverbs have a lot to say around what is inside us comes out. So make sure what comes out of us is good. That's a way of protecting what's inside us is good as well. We're going to finish off this section of learning about the book by watching this Bible Project video to learn a little bit more about the bigness of Proverbs and what's involved. Thanks so much, Steph and team.
How to be good at life.
Yeah. So each of these books tackles these questions from a unique perspective, and it's important to understand all of them to get a fully biblical perspective on the good life. So as a thought experiment, you could actually imagine each of these books as a person. So Proverbs would be like this brilliant young teacher, and Ecclesiastes the sharp middle-aged critic, and Job would be this weathered old man who's seen a lot in his day.
We're going to start by meeting the Book of Proverbs, the brilliant young teacher. And she's not just smart, she's smart about everything: work, relationships, sex, spirituality. She has incredible insights, things you wouldn't see on your own.
Yeah, she would be the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific advice.
So what makes her so smart?
Well, Proverbs can see things that most people don't see. She believes that there's an invisible creative force in the universe that can guide people in how they should live. And you can't see it, just like you can't see gravity, but it affects everything that we do.
So what's this force?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called chokhmah, and it usually gets translated into English as wisdom. It's an attribute of God that God used to create the world. And chokhmah has been woven into the fabric of things and how they work. So wherever people are making good or just or wise decisions, they're tapping into chokhmah.
And whenever someone's making a bad decision, they're working against chokhmah.
Right, or as it says in Proverbs chapter 1, the waywardness of fools will destroy them, but the one who listens to wisdom lives in security.
So it's like a moral law of the universe.
Yeah, it's a cause-effect pattern, and no one can escape it. And Proverbs personifies all of this as a woman.
Yeah, Lady Wisdom.
Right, and she roams around the earth, calling out, making herself available to anyone who's willing to listen to her and to learn. Which leads to the second thing Proverbs believes, that anyone can access and interact with wisdom and use it to make a beautiful life for yourself or for others.
You can create with it like a designer.
Yes, in fact, chokhmah in Hebrew isn't simply intellectual knowledge. The word is also used to describe a skilled artisan who excels at their craft, like woodworking or stonemasonry. So you show you possess chokhmah when you put it to work and develop the skill of making a good life.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's do this. Let's go find some wisdom.
But before you do, Proverbs has one more really important thing to consider. Chokhmah isn't some impersonal force. It's an attribute of God himself. And so in Hebrew thought, your journey to becoming wise has to begin with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. It's this healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And true wisdom means learning those boundary lines and not crossing them.
Now, all those ideas you just unpacked are in chapters 1 through 9 in Proverbs. But when I think of the book of Proverbs, I think of the collection of sayings, the Proverbs themselves. Tell me about those.
Yeah, those are what you find in chapters 10 on to the end of the book. It's a collection of hundreds and hundreds of proverbs about any and all aspects of life. And Chokhmah gets applied to them, resulting in this wise guidance to help you find a path towards success, and no matter what you do.
If I design my life with these sayings, life is going to be good.
Yeah, or as Proverbs puts it, it'll give health to your bones, prosperity, a long, rich life.
Which is a really big claim.
But you can see how it's often the case. Wise people, they tend to do better. Things usually work out well for them in life. And so that is the promise and the wisdom of the Book of Proverbs.
The Book of Proverbs is really beautiful, but if we take a step back, some people would argue it's a little too simplistic, because sometimes horrible things happen to really wise people, and sometimes foolish people get rewarded. It doesn't always work the way we think it should work.
That's right, which is why we need to go and listen to our next wise friend, Ecclesiastes the critic, because he's wrestled with that very problem, and he's going to push us further in our journey to find the good life.
So there you go. Good overview of the book of Proverbs. And it's very helpful, the three frames there around how we read Proverbs within the greater wisdom collection. Because if you just take Proverbs on its own, as I said last week, it doesn't always come true. They're not magic bullets or sayings. They're things that are generally true about our world. If you act wise, then you will reap wise rewards. But we all know of that mate, that friend, the one who did everything wrong and got the A, the one who didn't listen to the boss, lied and got the promotion. We all know of the person who we look at what is in Proverbs and go, how come they are rewarded when they didn't do the right thing? And sometimes when we do the right thing, we're actually disciplined, or we don't get to see a benefit from it. Sometimes we speak up for somebody, we say something, and we end up getting in trouble. So what Proverbs provides us with wisdom and provides us with the generalities of life and a lot of insight into God and how He designed our world to be, it doesn't always work out that way. Let's have a look at two passages now. We're going to look at Proverbs 4, 25 to 27, then we're going to have a look at Matthew 26. This is what Proverbs 25 to 27. We're going to jump back onto our path now. Let your eyes look straight ahead. So let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Don't look around, directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet. Think about the path which you walk on. Think about where your feet are taking you. Be steadfast in all your ways and the way you live your life. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and keep your foot from evil. There it is, that language of feet, path. The proverb is saying, look ahead, take careful consideration to the path you're walking on, and don't let your feet take you to somewhere that you don't want to be. And Jesus actually found his path go through a really unpleasant time right before he left this world. In Matthew 26, we have recorded the time that Jesus was about to be arrested, and he's praying to God in the Garden of Gethsemane. Let's have a read of what happens here. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit down here while I go over there to pray." So the disciples said, "Yep, we'll sit down." Now he took his close friends with him, Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, James and John, his inner circle. Jesus had his many disciples, his 12 disciples, his 3 and his 1. So he took his 3 with him and said, "Come with me." And he says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Will you stay with me and keep watch with me?" Going a little farther, Jesus fell with his face to the ground, and he prayed this prayer to God. "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Jesus is aware of what is about to happen. If you haven't read the story of Jesus before, what ends up happening is he gets arrested after this moment, he gets beaten up and eventually dies a death on a cross. And as I said last week, Jesus was the Son of God, but he experienced what we experience as humans, and he was aware of the pain, the humiliation, and the difficulty of the path that he was called to walk on. So he goes to God and he says, if there is any other way, please take this from me. He went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. He returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered into the hand of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Jesus lived the good life. If you take all the Proverbs and you apply them to how he lived, you would say he was doing what was wise every step of the way. Jesus lived in such a way that we now look at his life and say, how can we become like him? Because he showed us if God was in our position, how would he live? Exactly as Jesus would live. Jesus was the Son of God. He lived a life which is the good life, full of love, compassion. He healed, he challenged, he was involved in his community. And then he comes to a point now where he is about to die. But the Proverbs promise us long life. The Proverbs promise us wealth. The promise that if we do what is wise, then we will live well. And Jesus is here on his knees, about to go through one of the most horrific deaths. And he's saying to his Father, please, if you can take this away from me, please take it away from me. But the key to him walking his path is what he says after asking for it to be taken away. He says this little phrase, not as I will, but as you will. Jesus knew the path his feet were walking on, and he could see what was beyond it. But that didn't make the experience any simpler, any easier, and it didn't take away the pain, the humiliation, and just the realness of what he went through. He kept going because he trusted his heavenly Father. He assessed the path, he looked at where it led, and he said, yes, there is a cost, a big, big cost. But it's the wise thing for me to do. It's not the fun thing. It's not the joyful thing. It's not only the right thing, it's the wise thing. Jesus' life had led up to this point where he knew he would have to do something incredible on behalf of humanity so that you and I have an opportunity to know him today. And this was the moment. This was the beginning of that moment. And Jesus continued on his path, and it led him to a horrible, horrible death. But incredible new life that we get to now take part in. We are blessed because of his path that he walked along. So, what do you do when you follow you everywhere? Make sure the path you're on leads you to where you want to go. Make sure you know where your feet are walking. Make sure your gaze is fixed on a destination that you want to end up on. But how do you and I know which path we're on? Well, we need to stop and observe where we are. Here's a quick experiment for us to Here's a quick set of questions for us to go through to assess where we are in our life right now. So in your own brains, answer these. You can answer them out loud if you want to, but you might be the only one. You want to know where you are, the path you're walking? Here's some questions for us to consider. Where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your time each week? Many of us have a budget for our money, but not many of us have a budget for our time. And our time is so much more valuable. It's almost foolishness in humans to go, I know where every dollar goes, but I don't know where my hours go. Anyway, that's another sermon. Where do you spend your time? Related to that, where do you spend your money? The money comes in, the money goes out. What's the decision-making process there? What's going on there? Who are your friends? And this is a really important question. What is the quality of life that they are experiencing? The people you're hanging out with, how do they live? What are the results of their toils and their labors? What is the results of who they are? Who are your friends, and what is the environment that you are plugged into? What do people say about you and how you treat other people, how you deal with disappointment, how you express anger, how you love those that are close to you? If you want to have a really awkward or good conversation, go up to someone and say, what's it like being on the other side of me? Like, honestly, how do you experience me? And then that will either be a really great exercise or a really awkward one as they go, oh, okay, here's the conversation. They pull up a chair, they sit down, and you go, oh no, should not have engaged in this space. You got to ask yourself, are you where you planned on being at this point in your life? Are you where you wanted to be from your past decisions? And maybe have you grown a little tired, grumpy, easily annoyed, hopeless, or distracted? Very accurate. That's great. I won't ask who you're commenting on. I'll leave that between you and your family. It's great. Those questions make us realize the path we're walking on. And look for the destinations that you've landed on in your life. Your job, your friends, who you're married to, where you live. This is really important. Your past choices have walked you down this path to where you are right now. So when you stop and assess where you are and you think, I'm not happy with where I am, you've then got to step back and go, but I got me here. Life happened. And I just want to say pastorally, life happens. Things happen to us. Things happen that we do not understand. And I'm not for a second going to believe that asking some questions, listening to a proverb and trying to go, everything's fine, life's okay. That is not the case. People hurt. People die. People get sick. Things happen that we could never have accounted for. No matter how good you are at planning things out, you cannot plan the pains that come in our life. So I'm not saying simplistically that this path that we're on should be easy to figure out and it should be easy to manage. All I'm saying is we got to recognize where we are and our role in it. Because there are some things in our life that happen to us that are just out of our control. Maybe God teaches us something through it. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe there's a purpose behind it. Maybe there isn't, or we don't see it yet. Maybe something happens and we think, what the heck was that? And that's where it lands until we meet our Heavenly Father. Life is ups and downs and roundabouts. The point of this is to say, am I walking on the path with the choices and the agency that I have? Is it where I want to be going? And God might walk you around a little bit. He might take you on a wander to learn a few new things. But I think that if our heart and our mind is focused on God, on Jesus, on the Holy Spirit, on his interaction, our day-to-day practical chokmah, our living, our wise living, then there is going to be an opportunity for us to participate in setting some of the direction of that path. And the wisdom for you is to figure out, are you where you want to be? Are you using what you have to the fullest advantage? And are you being obedient to God's call on your life and loving other people well? Some questions that are really helpful to determine whether the path you're on is even one you want to be on are simple ones like this. Would you want a loved one to live the way that you do? That's a good question, isn't it? I like questions, and that is a really good one. Because we live in ways that we would never advise someone else to live. We say things to ourselves that we would never say to anybody else. So stop and ask yourself, if I could go to someone and say, you should live the way that I do you feel comfortable saying that? Some of you do, and that's awesome. God's blessed you to the point where you have self-awareness to go, I want to be an example for others to follow in a life of following Jesus in all the imperfection and awkwardness of who we are. But you've got to ask yourself, is how I'm living how I want other people to live? Would I advise others to do what I do? And this is a great question. I love this one. Would I be happy to leave earth right now with what I've done in my time? There will always be an unfinished symphony in your life. That's just a non, we all die with a to-do list. We never complete everything on earth. But can you leave the planet right now going, I'm happy with how I used my time? And if not, then figure out why. And you got to do something about that. Maybe there's a relationship that needs to be healed. Maybe there's some words of love you need to speak out to somebody. Maybe you need to stop living under the expectations of others or an unhealthy expectation of yourself. Maybe you need to immerse yourself in your relationship with God more. I don't know what it is. But if you left right now, would you be happy with what you've done in your time? And here's where I want to leave you this morning. I ask the band, you guys can jump up or sing in just a minute. Now, you may not have walked the wisest path up till now. You might be feeling like you need a little bit of help, or maybe you're just feeling a little tired, a little overburdened, a little burnt out. I don't know what your situation is this morning. But I believe that every person who God created, which, believe it or not, is you and me, us, yes. Every person that God created, He has a heart to see you thrive in this life to some degree. He has a plan for you. I believe that to be true. I believe that He will minister through some of our greatest pain. I believe that He calls us to honor Him and to live for the good of other people. Next week, we're going to find out more about community and why it's so important to God as we look at a proverb. But wherever you are, wherever you've come from, I believe that God has something for you. Now, you've got to go and figure that out. You need to go and spend some time in the Word. You've got to go and pray. You've got to go talk to your friends. You've got to get in a life group. You've got to figure out what He has planned for you. But what I'm saying with confidence is there's no one I've met yet that I can't see woven the story of God's redemptive love. It's in every person. We may not always use it. We may not always see it, but it's there. So if you follow Jesus this morning, the path that you are on matters not just for you to live the good life, but for other people to see the redemption of God's love in action. To be disciples that people can look at and say, yes, he's broken. Yes, he hasn't got it all together, but man, he loves God. And he's following Him the best he can. Now, if you're sitting this morning and you're going, don't know where the Jesus thing is at for me, then I just want to encourage you. He has a plan for your life. He loves you. And He wants you to recognize that He is amazing and has so much more for you than just living for yourself and passing away. He has a plan for you. When we do the wise thing, we know with sureness the path we're on is the one we're called to. When Jesus was in the garden, it was a sucky path to walk, a hard path to walk, but He knew it was a necessary path to walk. When you and I go through the ups and the devastating downs, if we are sure of our calling and we're sure of the path that we're on, then we know that Jesus is with us through that. And if you don't follow Jesus yet, would you invite Him into those spaces and choose to follow Him? There's so much wisdom to living a life under His authority, but it's something you've got to experience for yourself. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, it's so great that You have given us wisdom. Wisdom to spend our time, our money, our attention, our energy on things in this world while we have time in this world. But Lord, it's not always clear what the path is. So I want to pray for anyone who is uncertain right now, Lord, that You will make it clear for them what their path in this life is. And for those who are walking a path with You, whose feet are taking them to the destination they want to go, I pray that Your wisdom and Your Holy Spirit will continue to guide them and open up their journey for others to learn and hear from You through. May the examples of Jesus we have in our community be amazing examples that can transform the city of Kalamunda because we have wise people living wise lives under Your authority. In Your name and for Your glory. Amen.